Hello, my name is Donavon Lace. Welcome to Registration X Rex Radio. We have got an interesting show for you this evening, and I'm pleased to be here. Our show tonight is entitled Internet Sexting, Fact or Fiction, and we have got some great folks who have come on board to talk about this issue, and so I'm very, very pleased that the panel of folks is here this evening. And as this show is being recorded live, this is the first live show of Registration X, so we're just tremendously pleased that everybody has come together to help us do this. I think it's an issue that really needs to be discussed and needs to be talked about. For the record, Registration X nor Donavon Lace, I got to do my house cleaning. For the record, Registration X nor Donavon Lace condone or promote any illegal sexual activities. Registration X and Donavon Lace believe in punishment for illicit sexual activity coupled with treatment and restorative justice. Both entities promote education and prevention programs coupled with treatment and successful reintegration of those who have served their sentences. Registration X and Donavon Lace would like to commend the actions of law enforcement officers like Jim Murray of Newton County and others who enforce the law while holding themselves accountable to the same standards. With that said, I'd like to first introduce Gary Schwartz. Gary is with the Umansky Law Firm, which services, or I hope I pronounced that correctly, I've been working on that all week, which services Orlando, Orange County, Seminole County, and basically that Central Florida area, and was recently interviewed in conjunction with the Polk County stings out there, and made some statements, and one of the statements was the manner in which these stings are conducted all too often net innocent people who would have no sexual interest in minors. Gary, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Donavon. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate your time and for having me.
Excellent. Oh, great, excellent. Good to have you here. Let me ask you, you did this article in the Sun Sentinel. First of all, what sparked that article? Did they approach you, or did you just feel you needed to come forward? How did that come about?
They did approach me. I was sort of representing and continue to represent sort of a high-profile case out there in Polk County. And I've always been interested in cases like this where I call them thought crimes, where people are basically being prosecuted and incarcerated based on things that didn't actually happen, based on imaginary situations. And I think that's exactly what's going on in these cases. In particular, in Polk County, that county can be a little nuts with regards to this kind of crimes.
Okay. Well, now let me ask them. You say the manner in which these things are being done. Are they not going by the numbers, or they're legalese? Are they finding loopholes in constitutional law, or does it just come down to kind of a case-by-case situation?
It is a case-by-case situation, but it's my position that basically they're casting the net too wide, and they're being too aggressive in bringing people in and to try to describe them as sex offenders and to try to convince them to hook up with these mythical kids who may or may not exist. And real briefly, I know we're going to get into this throughout the show, one of the ways that they most often do this is they'll put an ad on a publication like Craigslist or Backpage, and the ad won't even mention sex with a minor. It may say something to the effect of single mom looking to teach their son or daughter about life, and because they'll place it in a place like casual encounter section of Craigslist, for example, people are online looking for adult sexual encounters. There's nothing illegal with that. So a person may respond to that ad it's a law enforcement personnel posing as a single mother, looking for a liaison with the single mom with no intention to have any sex with the single mom's kid, who, again, doesn't exist because it's entirely a creation of law enforcement. But the law enforcement officer will push it and push it and push it and keep bringing the kid up. And often what happens is the subject or the defendant in the case will give up and say, all right, whatever, because they feel like they have to say whatever to have a liaison with the adult. When they never have any realistic intention to meet a child at all.
As I talk, as we would go through, I know that we're about to. I'm about to introduce Scott, who was in this very same situation, and we're going to, or in his, excuse me, not Scott himself, but his good friend was in this very same situation, and we're going to go through the merits of that. And I'd like to hold you on standby so I can bounce some questions off to you as we kind of go through what happened to Scott's friend, and we can talk to some legalese and bounce that information off with you. So, Gary, if you just hold on for me, and I'm going to have some questions for you, okay?
Perfect. Thanks.
I'd like to introduce Scott. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Donavon.
Excellent, excellent. Now, Scott had a good friend who was targeted in a sex sting, and he believes because his friend's was his sexual preference was he was a homosexual. He feels that in his area of the country where he was at, that he was targeted by this. Now, you made a statement that this operation that was conducted, the sting operation that was conducted, was advertised by law enforcement as being initiated. This contact was initiated, or these people were posing as minors, and law enforcement answered their ads that were posted on Craigslist. Is that correct?
It's correct in this particular case. I can't say that about the rest. It was set up so that they posted an ad with an aunt and a niece, or an uncle and a nephew. I don't know. Again, in this particular case, yes, they answered my friend's ad. They approached him.
So he did not go after them, in fact, or he was not part of the core of this thing, the way it was set up. They actually made contact with him. He never made contact with them.
That's correct.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened to him after they initiated this contact with him?
Well, the initial email that they sent, appeared that a third grader wrote it. I mean, there were so many misspellings, and it was just an absurd, like somebody playing a game. Obviously, somebody not who they were saying they were, which was a 14-year-old about to be 15, getting ready to visit Florida with their father for their birthday.
Okay. So it was the response that he got was an absurd response. So why did he answer? Why didn't he just disregard, or what was the this type of response to his ad?
If you're familiar with any of this, and if you're not, there's a lot of role playing, fantasy role playing, and game playing here on these internet websites where these adults are looking for sexual relations with other adults. So it's you never really know what type of response you're going to get. But this one, again, from a 14-year-old about to turn 15 and didn't even know how to spell his hometown where he's from. He, referring to daddy instead of dad. It was just really ridiculously childish in its way of nature, to the point that I think it was just more curiosity to him as who is this playing the game with me? Could it be somebody from the past that he'd spoken to before that recognized him through his description of himself in the ad? So it was just strictly curiosity. And
okay,
he emailed.
So he was curious about it. And so he answered or made a response. And so what happened after he made this initial response back?
He sent a response back knowingly. No, obviously this person wasn't who they were claiming to be, so he asked them to send a picture. And when he did that, the response back was, "I can't send a picture right now. Daddy's almost home." That ended the conversation for the day. He did not go any further. He did not email them back.
Okay. So there was an initial email back. So after that, he emailed back, and then what occurred? I mean, what did he say in this follow-up email to them?
He just asked them for the picture, and then the response was, "I can't right now because Daddy's almost home." So with that, he didn't respond anymore. The second day starts. He gets an email from them, or from this persona. This persona. Yes. What we'll refer to as the persona.
What we'll refer to as the persona. Very good. So what was in this picture that he got?
It was a picture of an age-regressed photo, obviously. I mean, it was very obvious. You can tell by the faces. And anyway, it was a picture of this supposed 14-year-old and his sister, and they were standing in front of a movie theater.
Okay.
And there was a caption email that was sent along with it, and it said in there that this is a picture of myself and my sister who died in a car accident a year ago on my birthday.
Very interesting. Okay. Now, you said in some of the information I'm reading here that this picture raised an eyebrow because the movie was a current movie that was in the behind the picture that he was looking at, or something to that effect?
That's correct. They happened to be standing in front of the movie theater, and they were standing directly in front of the now showing movie posters. And the one that depicts the most was the movie Here and Now, and the release date on that movie was October 2010. This was March 2011, which dates that picture at 5 months, which negates the fact that this is a picture of me and my sister, and she was killed in a car accident a year ago on my birthday. It's no longer a year-old picture. It's only 5 months old. And what's even more interesting about that is that the movie theater that they're standing in front of happens to look real familiar to my friend as well, because he's lived here for 30 years, and he's attended this mall and watched his movies at this mall since he was a small child. And this picture was taken inside a local mall here in Central Florida in his hometown. And again, this is a picture of a boy who's traveling from Charleston, South Carolina, and has never been to Florida before. But he's standing in a local mall here in front of the movie theater.
Okay, so from your friend's perspective, he's got an ad that's on Craigslist. It's answered someone he's posing as a 14-year-old, but he's looking at the inconsistencies here. He goes, wait a minute, this isn't something's not right here. This certainly isn't a picture of, the dialogue is not matching the picture. Okay, so what happens after that? He gets this picture. Red flags are right now. He's curious who this person is, what the correspondence is. Somebody playing a joke? Is that the type of thing that's being discussed at this point, or is he going, hey, some 14-year-old kid is trying to where's his mindset at this point?
Boy, his mindset is this obviously isn't anybody from Charleston. It appears to be an adult now. The conversation swings from a childish talking to an adult conversation talking. I mean, the email, if you read it, there's no more daddy and misspelled words and upper and lowercase letters. It's a response from what appears to be now an adult, quite possibly even a different person.
Okay, quite possibly a different person. Was there any phone conversation between these two?
There ended up being a phone call. They on the day 3, they welcomed him to call them, and they sent a phone number via the email. And the phone number, just to add more to the case that this obviously isn't who they say is a Tampa area code.
Okay, so it's a local number, local picture. He's now was there a meeting set up via this phone call, or is it?
Yes, there was. Okay. They invited him actually through another email after the phone call. He sent the address.
Okay.
And they invited him over to the address. Okay.
So he goes over, I assume, because he was caught up in this thing that he did go over. Now, when he went to travel to this, do you believe it was his intent to have some type of illegal sex act with a 14-year-old, or was he going over there out of curiosity to find out, once and for all, who this individual was that he felt was not who they were representing themselves to be?
Yes, that would be correct as the second part of that. In no time did he ever think that this was a 14-year-old. This was obviously an adult pretending to be a child for whatever reason. So the answer would be yes to the second part, that his curiosity drove him there to figure out what this person's real story is, what's really going on here.
Okay. So let's kind of really cut to the chase. He drives over. What happens when he gets there?
Well, he was sat in the driveway for about 2.5 minutes. That's where the police footage starts once the vehicle enters the driveway. And again, it was about 2.5 minutes on the clock. And as he was sitting there, I mean, obviously through his mind, he's wondering, if this person's got so much to cover up, this might not be somebody I want to actually meet. Maybe they're just overly obese or handicapped or whatever have you. And in order to avoid an awkward situation, he decided to call the phone number back again that they sent him. And there was no answer.
From the driveway?
From the driveway.
Okay.
And then there was no answer, and then he called again, and there was no answer, and they called him back.
What did they say?
At that point, he answered the phone, and I'm not sure what the initial conversation from them was to him, but his reasoning for making the phone call was to tell this individual that he needed to step outside and present his true self before he was going to come up to the house.
Let me ask you something. The voice on the phone.
Yeah.
The voice on the phone, he was talking to this person. Now, sometimes you can't tell age and whatnot, but you can tell when you're talking to a kid on the phone. Did he think he was talking to a child on the phone?
Absolutely not. And not only did he not think he was talking to a child, but in the midst of the phone call, this persona willingly start to talk about, well, where do you live, in reference to my friend. And as he said, I live over by Coleman. Again, a Charleston, South Carolina person who's never been to Florida before says, oh, over there by the federal prison in Coleman.
Okay.
And the response of my friend is, yes, just feeding the fact that now I mean, it's all coming together that obviously this is no child from South Carolina or no child at all, because what 14-year-old knows that there's a federal prison in Coleman, Florida?
Right. So he calls them and he tells the person to step out. You must reveal yourself before I go into the house. Does the person step out?
Yes. A grown man stepped out the door and waved him in, and then stepped back into the house.
A grown man?
A grown man. He's Detective Miller here, and he's 30, 32, 33 years old.
Okay, so now did he present himself as a police officer, or he just said, hey, come in to the house?
He just stepped out and waved him in, had the phone in the other hand, and waved him with his right hand with the phone being in his left hand, and then he stepped back into the residence. Okay, now did your friend go follow him into the house? Sure. I mean, at this point, this man is he's a good-looking guy. I mean, so this is part of what my friend was looking for in the beginning, and there it was.
Okay. Let me ask you to hold for just a second, Gary. Let me ask you at this point. Well, first of all, I assume that when he went in the house, they then arrested him. Let me verify that. Correct?
Yeah, he was instantly arrested when the door opened.
He was when the door opened.
Yeah.
Gary, let me ask you.
Yes, sir.
How is something like this? How do you defend against something like this guy's case? Here you have a sting operation that was advertised as that people were out on the internet answering ads. Not in this gentleman's case. He was not answering an ad. Okay, they contacted him. I know in this particular area, or there are very few where homosexuality is still underground in this area. Okay, so he answers this ad. He goes over there. He tells the person, "Hey, you must reveal yourself. I need to know what I'm dealing with here." And the person reveals themselves not to be a child, but to be a grown man, and they still arrested him. How is this possible?
Well, because the way the statute is worded is tricky. It's traveling with the intent to meet a minor. Okay, So if at the time prior to, from the state, I'm arguing playing devil's advocate a little bit, so I hope you'll...
Sure, go ahead.
But from the state's perspective, he didn't see the guy get out of the house and present himself as an adult man until he arrived at the house. So the traveling took place before the revelation that it's a grown man. So the state's argument would be that prior to the grown man coming out of the house, Scott's friend believed that it was the 14 to 15-year-old kid. So that's the state's perspective. Now, from a defense perspective, you're going to have to, when you're picking a jury, you're going to have to get to talk very candidly about homosexuality and do your best that you can. I understand in some jurisdictions it's harder than in others to pick a fair juror who won't convict someone just because they're gay or engaging in a sexually non-conservative lifestyle. But you have to get into the fact that, you know, it's not unusual for not only gay men but heterosexual people as well to go online for the purpose of hooking up for a sexual liaison, and that's what happened. And then you have to also bring in the fact and talk about the fact to a jury that role play is not at all uncommon. And the fact that what was presented by law enforcement in this case was so incredible based upon the knowledge that Scott's friend had about the movie theater and the impossibility of the timeline that's set forth by the cop. He just didn't believe it was really a kid. And that he went out, he was he wanted to see what the person looked like. And when it was confirmed to him that the person, from his perspective, that the person with whom he was speaking was not a child, when the adult came out of the house, he thought, all right, great, let's make this happen. And so because he was never fooled by the police officer into thinking that he was a child, there's really no crime.
So here's my question: Is this more this? And we'll talk about this a little bit more. But this seems to hinge on belief.
It's true.
And
Absolutely.
what I find amazing is if I like to juxtapose things and use parables, and if in fact that is what they're using or what is being used, I could say this person who goes to church on Sunday, okay, on a consistent basis and reads their Bible. How do I prove they believe in God? How can I prove that? They can say it.
You're absolutely right.
They can even engage in the actions, but how do you prove belief?
That's an excellent point that you raise, and because it is what I call a thought crime, you can only prove intent, which is required to convict someone of this crime, by circumstantial evidence. So to follow your analogy, the state, if they were prosecuting someone for believing in God, then their proof would be like, look what this guy does. He goes to church every Sunday. He reads the Bible. He knows the parables. He can cite verses. But it's true that doesn't necessarily mean that he believes in God, but it's circumstantial evidence that he believes in God. Similarly, when they're trying to put these cases together, because they really can't know what's going on in someone's mind, so they do the best they can to put together a situation where there's as much damning circumstantial evidence to imply intent as they possibly can. And then they, depending on the investigation, they do better or worse jobs. Now, with regards to Scott's friend, it sounds like they did not a great job at putting enough controls in place on the sting such that there is a lot to convince a jury, hopefully, that he really had the intent to meet a child.
Let me go back to Scott really, really quickly. I have something else here that I want to speak to. That in your friend's defense, he went to a top-rated psychosexual analyst. Is that true?
That's absolutely true.
And what was the result of that analysis?
That in no way, shape, or form is this individual a harm to any child under any set of circumstances, period.
So there was nothing found in his analysis that that said that he had any pedophilia or he was nothing.
No.
And you said he'd lived in this county all of his life. Had he had any dealings with the law? Was he a frequent flyer down there at the jailhouse or?
He's lived here 30 years up to this point and has zero criminal history. You know what? My heart goes out to this guy, and I hope that he is a great lawyer, and that he gets a jury that can see past anything that what I call moral outrage or whatnot about his sexuality, and really sees the fact that this guy was out, if everything is stated the way that you stated, and I'm sure it is, that he was just curious to see who was messing with him on the other end of the phone. And that's really what this was all about. Thank you so much, Scott. Well,
go ahead.
Donavon, if you don't mind, I needed to add to that. Unfortunately,
sure, go right ahead.
Unfortunately, along with his zero criminal history, they did serve a search warrant on his property. They did confiscate all his computers, his phones, his cameras, anything that they could find or try to find any evidence pointing to any other conversations with any children or whatever, child pornography, whatever have you. And they found nothing. They seized 8 cards. They found nothing. And not only that, unfortunately, his case has been presented to a jury, and it was a jury in this area we have a part of town known as the Villages. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's a large retirement community. Unfortunately, 5 of his 6 jurors were villagers, and these are people who are well into their 60s and older who don't have really any relation with the internet or computers whatsoever because they just don't believe in them. They think that they're evil and wrongdoing, and they hear enough about it on the news. And they don't even have computers in their home. So it was hard to even get a jury of his peers that would be able to relate to a case such as this. And unfortunately, although the investigation was done pretty sloppily, they were able to persuade this jury, and he was found guilty and convicted and is currently serving time in prison.
I am just very, very sorry to hear that. That case looks like it was just very, very easy to see through, and I hope that he can find some relief upon appeal. I really do. Scott, I want to just once again thank you for coming on and telling us about your friend. And as I said, I hope that on appeal that he can find relief, because it doesn't sound like he got a fair shake at all. Which kind of brings me to our next guest, which is Trey. He is the author of Florida Creating Sex Offenders. Trey, are you with us? Trey, are you with us? I tell you what, it looks like Trey might be having some technical difficulties. Hold on. Trey, are you with us? Trey, are you with us?
I'm here.
Oh, very good. Sorry about that. Trey,
Okay,
author of Florida Creating Sex Offenders. This was a story that was that got some. I know that you had a hard time getting it in, and it was finally printed down there in the area where you're at. And you were saying that the recent numbers have shown that there has been a 74% increase in the number of sex offenders as to only 23% of the rest of the nation over the past 5 years. Is that what inspired you to write this article?
Right, well, that as well as that I was involved in one of these things also, and I felt I was wrongly accused as a sex offender, which I knew that wasn't the case. So that's why I was compelled to write, at least do something about it.
Let me ask you, you say that you were also involved in one of these operations, these sting operations. Was your situation similar to Scott's, where someone answered an ad on Craigslist, or?
No, but that situation did occur in the sting operation I was in, where a guy did place an ad on Craigslist, and they responded to it.
Okay.
But mine was not like that. They actually placed the ad in Craigslist itself, saying that, that they were of age, 19 years old, and my communication was never with any minor at all. So
you're saying that in your situation, you were talking to an adult on the phone, okay, or via chat, or on this through these email communicators or whatnot. You were talking to an adult. How does a minor insert it into this?
Well, they do that bait and switch right off the bat. They introduce their sister as all of a sudden 14 years old now, and that's how they perform that. That's the way they did me.
What did the ad say?
2 sisters for hot fun, I believe that's something like that. I believe
something to that effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also within the content of the body of the ad is also suggestive as well. I mean, it's making you think you might have 2 twin sisters to that effect.
So here's a situation where you're on one of these in one of these chat rooms or whatever, or you're looking at an ad. You see an ad. Was there any indication in the ad that there was that everybody was above board, above age, that type of thing? You're in an adult section?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you initiate contact. Contact is made. All of a sudden, there's an age brought up about this younger sister comes into it. Did I know a lot of times they send pictures? Did you get a picture? Was a picture sent to you?
Did get a photograph. Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I ask him that because I know that he got a photograph because I've actually seen the photograph that he was sent, and I must believe that upon reviewing that photograph, that the 2 women depicted in that photograph, by my layman eyes, I wouldn't consider them to be underage, as the picture that I saw. So I'm assuming that that's what Trey thought. So you get the picture, and you're looking at the picture, and you're listening to the dialogue coming back and forth in the email chat. What were you thinking that what was going on?
There was a little confusion. It didn't make any sense, knowing that I'm a computer guy. I'm online a lot anyway. I know people misrepresent themselves all the time. So
okay.
I really didn't know exactly what to think or what to make of it, but because I continued the conversation, I guess that's where I went wrong, supposedly.
Okay, it's because you continued the conversation. So
right.
Did you
not in a sexual way or anything like that, because I continued the conversation with a supposed 19-year-old, and she had already introduced her sister as now 14 instead of the indicated 19. That was the problem. That's why the judge ruled the way he did.
So you never real or imagined, so to speak, spoke with anyone other than the 19-year-old via the chat.
That is correct.
Okay. And did you travel to this location to meet this 19-year-old?
I did travel after maybe the third day of exchanging emails.
Right.
And like that other gentleman, I pulled in the driveway. I sat there for a minute. I placed a phone call. Video shows them on the other line, more than inviting me in. Basically, welcoming me. And the door was cracked, so I walked on in, and that's obviously we know the rest of the story.
Gary, let me go to you really, really quickly and ask you this question. If, in fact, I am in a situation where there is a girl who is that I believe is of age and willing to explore entertainment with me, but has an accompanying sister that I don't really want to have anything to do with, is it okay if I go over and she goes, well, my sister's here or my friend is here, but she's underage? If my intent is to meet up with the elder and try to remove the babysitter role out of the way and get rid of the minor inconvenience, so to speak, so that I can focus on the 19-year-old, so that I'm in a situation where, hey, I think I've got some chemistry after I'm talking to this girl, but now I got to deal with the little sister, which I don't have interest in. Is it illegal for me to go over and meet the older sister if that's my intent is just to be with her?
Technically, no, but again, since you're keeping in mind, like we talked about earlier, since the whole case about intent is circumstantial, my advice would be, well, firstly, based on these facts, because this with regards to Trey's situation, that's exactly the way I see most of the stings come up in Central Florida. I would be suspect at the insertion of the young girl, and I would first of all assume it's probably law enforcement, just because based on my background. But knowing that to be the case, if you do have a legitimate interest in rendezvousing with a 19-year-old, you have to make it super clear. And they're not going to leave it alone. If the law enforcement, they're going to keep trying to push it. They're going to say, well, if you're not interested in my sister, I've been talking to a lot of other guys, so I'm going to let you go. You're not what we're looking for. And then sometimes they may go further and say, what if you and I start and then my sister joins in? And you really, to avoid arrest, you have to be exquisitely clear that absolutely not. The young person, the person who is not of age, will have nothing to do with any sexuality involving myself.
So you have to state that plainly.
Very
plainly, under no circumstances, that, hey, this is what I'm coming to meet you. I have no interest in your sister whatsoever. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. If you don't want to meet under those circumstances, I'm not coming over. Okay.
But isn't entrapment about the? It's not about the guilt of the defendant. It's about the actions of the police.
Well, if you want to get into entrapment, you're exactly right. I mean, we can talk about that right now. Entrapment, basically, there's three things in Florida, at least, in entrapment. In the case there's a Florida Supreme Court case called Munoz that sets it forth, and there's three things that have to be shown, and it's up to the defendant to show that they were entrapped, because entrapment is basically saying, I committed the crime, but I committed it because the cops went too far. So the first thing you have to show is inducement, which is that you only did what you did because the police did what they did to get you to engage in the crime. In other words, you never would have engaged in this crime but for the cops pushing too hard. Then if you can show that, then the state has to come back and show that you were predisposed of the crime, even regardless about the cops pushing too hard. And so in a lot of these situations, and I know with regards to Trey and I think with regards to Scott's friend, these guys have no priors. Not only no priors involving minors, but no priors at all. And so if you can convince a judge that there was inducement, that the cops went too far, a lot of times the state is not going to prove that you were predisposed to the crime, and you have a shot at getting the case thrown out for entrapment. Now,
what happens is the judge's ruling on my entrapment motion was such a joke, and I almost laughed. It was so ridiculous. So Donavon, I think you'll agree with me that after reading the chats and comparing that to his decision, it pretty much was a joke, correct?
The two didn't really match up as I read that information, and I just was thinking to myself exactly, what was the judge thinking as to pose what was going on to the chats, and the two didn't really add up, and I'm thinking definitely on an appeal you'll be able to go back in. But something I want to bring up is that you were not, I know in a lot of these sting operations, everything, when you get to court, it's cut and dry, you're convicted, and then you find yourself on a lifetime civil commitment on the registry, sex offender registry, which, Trey, you were not on the sex offender registry. Is that correct?
Right. That is correct. They dropped those charges, just left me with, Florida State Statute 934.215, which is unlawful use of two-way communication device.
Wow.
Let me ask you this, Gary. Is it that, based on your experience, why, now, and we know how aggressive the DA can be in these type of cases, extremely aggressive. They're dealing with an unprotected class of people, a crime that most people consider heinous. They know 9 times out of 10 in a jury it's a slam dunk. Why would they drop charges and to a two-way communication absolving Trey of being on the registry? Just speculate.
Not having seen the transcript, I'm assuming that they probably agreed somewhat with Trey, and that maybe the transcript was close enough that they weren't convinced that they didn't go too far, that Trey didn't have a good defense. That's I've never seen that happen, candidly. Trey.
Well, that's pretty much correct because I didn't solicit anything from them. It was a 19-year-old trying to solicit, that she actually did the soliciting on numerous occasions.
Right.
She tried to solicit me to. Go ahead.
Why?
That's another good issue because, right, I mean, at a certain point, one of the charges they always try to throw at people trapped in these things is solicitation. But under the plain language, as well as the legal definition of solicitation, solicitation is an offer. So to me, the person that's putting the ad is the solicitor, not the person responding to the ad.
What they say from mere solicitation does not constitute inducement, but numerous solicitations is pretty much harassment. So
I agree.
From my standpoint, I was pretty much harassed, thus induced, but the judge did not find that in his written decision on my motion.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry to belabor it, but I want to ask Trey a clarification question. Trey, when you say that they dropped the charges involving mandatory registration, did you wind up pleading to the two unlawful use of the two?
I pled out to that one charge. They threw that offer on the table to drop those other three charges. Pled to the one charge, expressly reserving my right to appeal the judge's decision on my order for my motion entrapment hearing.
Well, Trey, you did very well for yourself, and I think that the reason, to answer your question, Donavon, knowing that now, the state must have realized that they had real problems with the case, and they just wanted to get something out of the case. And so
here's my question on that: what happened to? Why is it now that just because we have you in the hot seat, we must get something? We know we don't have anything. We're going to drop these charges, or we're going to lessen the charges, or we're going to reduce it, we're going to change it. But now that you're in the hot seat, we must get something instead of doing the right thing, recognizing that this gentleman, they didn't have enough evidence to say that he was traveling to go meet this minor for sex. They knew that wasn't the case. They didn't have the evidence to prove. Why didn't they just drop the case? Why does the DA not just drop cases?
Well, I mean that's an interesting question, Donavon. The truth of the matter is that the actual state attorney is an elected official. I believe they have to run for re-election every 6 years, and so they don't want to look soft on these crimes. They don't want to be seen by the voting populace as someone that's cool with dismissing charges against perceived pedophiles. And just also, from the individual assistant state attorney perspective, they're all watched by their supervisors. And I would say 99% of the time, they want to get something out of a case that they're prosecuting versus letting it go. Because what's typically appreciated in the state attorney's office is being a fighter and going to trial on hard cases rather than, unfortunately, I really believe this, and I say this as someone that prosecuted for 4.5 years. That is valued above doing the right thing quite often, which is horrifying, but I think it's true.
Well, I tell you what, I'm gonna leave it at that. I really don't have a rebuttal for that because that I have to think about that because I would like to believe that our DA's office, when they know that they have someone who is innocent of the charges brought against them, would do the right thing. Drop the case and let the person return to their life. And it's disturbing to hear that is not what is rewarded. That fighting to the very bitter end with whatever shred you have. Is it when the evidence shows that this person this is not true, then you let them go and you move on to the next case. Trey, I want to thank you. Go ahead.
I do want to say that there are individual exceptions to that, and there are prosecutors that are very careful and take their oath of attorney very seriously and will do the right thing even if it's politically unpopular.
But that's not happening in these cases. That's not happening in these cases, and that's a problem that we're experiencing in Florida. Is nobody is looking at it for face value. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. Nobody's beating these entrapment. You said not one entrapment motion has been granted. I mean, I haven't heard of one, and that's ridiculous because they can't be doing such a good job that that not one entrapment motion of the hundreds that have been arrested the whole time. And that's just kind of odd. Plus, also, law enforcement also reports to the media that they just caught America's most wanted pedophiles. So then they also say at the same time, they say, well, these guys come from all walks of life, and we're going to prosecute to the full extent of the law. So that law enforcement doesn't want to look bad on their end as well and have it come back to haunt them.
Well, I tell you what, it sounds like a lot of this has to do with public perception, and public perception creating policy rather than facts, figures, and truth creating policy, and I've always had a problem with that. Trey, I want to thank you for writing your article. It's posted, as a matter of fact, on my blog, registrationx.net. Go to blog and go to the current blog, and you can read the story that Trey put together. I think it's definitely worth a read, and that's why I posted it there. Trey, thank you so much for coming on to the show, and I want to now direct the conversation to Rick. Rick was caught up in such a situation. Rick, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Excellent, excellent. Now I understand that you were in an adult chat room,
I was,
and basically two officers posing as minors were trying to solicit something to you. Can you tell us what happened and what were the kind of the just a brief description of how you were caught up in this thing?
I was in Florida from out of state. Got on the internet, got on Yahoo chat rooms. One is, you had to click mature, and then it was the Florida chat room that was under the mature site. Picked a profile to talk to that had, one of them had 99 as their age, the other one had nothing in their profile age. So I started talking to these people, talked for just a few minutes, asked age, wouldn't get an answer, and then after we got into the conversation, probably about 4 or 5 minutes, finally got an answer of, I'm 14, and I discontinued chatting. And about 3 or 4 minutes later, they came back to me. What's up? Are you not going to talk to me some more? So we
hold on. Let me get this straight. They said 14. You said end of conversation. Done.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Yes. Both of them. And they're also talking to me at the same time. I actually had IM'd one of them, and 30 minutes later, I IM'd the other one. And within 5 seconds of each other, after this 30-minute wait, they both started talking to me at the same time.
Okay. So you discontinued both of them. They contact you again. What happens then?
We talked for a little bit more, and there was some question of, because I said, look, I'm looking for somebody to meet. And they said, well, if you came down here, what would you do? I said, if I came down there, here's some things I would like to do. I'm not proud of a few things, but really it was more of a here's what I would do. And then I said again, what is your age again? And they said it, and I discontinued chatting again.
Okay.
And about 3 to 4 minutes later, they came back saying, hey, you still there? You're not going to talk to me? What's up? So during this, I kept asking for, I want to talk to you on the phone. I want to hear your voice. Because things don't seem...
Something didn't seem right to you.
Something didn't seem right. So the one finally made the phone, or actually gave me a number. I called them. It was a female. It was the same female that I was talking to in the chat room, disguising her voice to be young. And I actually hung up the phone. And if they had the phone record, which we never subpoenaed and they never gave to us in discovery, but I think you would hear me saying, oh, my gosh, and hung up the phone. Because she sounded, you know what, she could be young. I hung up the phone. She immediately contacted me. I didn't say anything. And then about 2.5 hours later, she contacted again saying, hey, why'd you hang up? Can't you talk to me some more? And I said, nope, and discontinued. And then about 30 minutes later, she tried again. And I did not talk to that one. The other one continued. We continued talking through the afternoon, off and on. Sometimes there were times that you can see in the chat log where I just have quit talking again. As a matter of fact, usually it's when I say things like, you know what, you're young, I'm going to quit talking. And then the third time I did that to the male detective that was pretending to be 14, year-old girl, by the way. He actually said, after about a 3-minute break, said, "Hey, I'm nice. I send pictures," and sent me pictures, 6 pictures of her, I guess.
Now let me ask you: in the depiction of the picture, what is the age of the person in the picture, based on your layman observation?
I will base it on my sister, who used to work with a modeling agency, and she's seen all 6 of them that he sent at the same time, saying, "This is me." She said, first of all, there are 3 different girls there. Second of all, one of them probably is 14. The one with bunny slippers is probably a 14-year-old. Then there's probably a 16-year-old, a 19-year-old, and 2 21-year-olds.
And this is based on your sister's professional opinion in the modeling business.
In her previous life, she's not doing that anymore, but she had
I understand.
Dealt with modeling.
But in her, yes,
dealt
with modeling. So
and
she
I
has
agree. That was what I would say too. But I showed them to her, and I said, "You tell me." I've showed them to other people, and they're the same thing. They go, "That's not even the same person." So again, I tried to get this person to talk to me on the phone, and finally, this had started about 10:30 in the morning. So finally, about 3 in the afternoon, he sent me a phone number. So I am now talking to a female detective that is not him on the phone. And so we talk, and I remember the conversation just not lining up with what we had been talking about. So, in my mind, I'm thinking, who is this? Who are you? Your pictures say one thing, your chat says another, your voice says another, and it did not sound like a young person. It sounded like a late 20s, early 30s female. So we talked for a little bit, and I think on the phone, although I don't have the phone records, because, of course, they never put them on my discovery, even though they say they have them, and my public defender would not subpoena them, and that's a whole other issue. But I think there we talked about I was going to drive down and meet. And then about 30 minutes later, I got online and said, "You know what, I'm not coming. I'm not coming." And that the officer, the male officer, went into a tirade. "I can't believe we've talked all afternoon and you're not going to come. You say one thing and then you say the other. Why, I'll walk down to a store. I'll walk somewhere if you'll meet me there." And I finally said, "Fine. Where do you want to meet?" She said, "There's a Sunoco right down the road. We can meet there." I said, "Okay, we'll get something to eat." They said, "Pizza, okay." My mom left me $150. I said, "Pizza's fine. That'll work."
Okay, Gary.
Yes, sir.
There's no, and I'm assuming at this point that any prior conversation, okay, when you say, "No, I don't want to meet with you," you renegotiate that contract and say, "Okay, well, I'll meet you not at your house, but in a public place for a meal." Does that not become intent at that point?
That's another defense. I've had pretty much exactly the same fact pattern, except I think it was with the Denny's. Because arguably what you're doing is you're going to meet someone. Even let's assume that you just, again, playing devil's advocate, worst case scenario, that you believe the person to be a child. You're going to meet them at a pizza place with no intention during that rendezvous to be having sex. That's not a crime. I mean, arguably it may be a crime, like, I don't know, depending on the content of your conversation. Maybe they could get you for a misdemeanor contribution to delinquency of a minor. But, the purpose of the traveling has to be for something sexual, for you to be guilty of the crime. And I think that is something, we've actually gone to trial on that issue, and I think the jury agreed with us.
So it's in a state here, based on what Rick has told us, is that all throughout this conversation, he's trying to break this off. He doesn't want to meet. He's got questionability about age. He's not certain. He's not 100% okay with what's going on. It's obvious he didn't jump right on this and say, "Oh, you're 14, I'm on my way." And finally, but wasn't it the officers badgering him? Why is it legal for them to continue beyond the attack, so to speak, or the solicitation, to him when he says no? Why doesn't no mean no?
I totally agree with you, Donovan. And Rick, first of all, I'm very sorry that you had this experience, but I think you're totally right. You saying no and then continuing to come back at you is really the strongest case of entrapment from a defense perspective that we've heard about so far, from my perspective. We've had other questions about intent, but really what we have is your mind being changed by the persistence of law enforcement, where your initial thought pattern was, I'm not interested in doing this.
Right.
That's inducement.
I tell you what.
That's what I told my public defender, but she didn't believe me. Anyway.
I know that once again there is some moral outrage because mainstream America is not comfortable with people using the internet in this fashion, to use it as a place to hook up, a digital bar, if you will. So I know there's some outrage there, moral outrage there, but does that make it legal or not legal? I don't think that comes into play, and I think that's part of the problem here. I tell you what, Rick, I want to appreciate, because I want to get everybody in. I still got Vince and Barbara to talk to.
Right.
But I wanted to get this on because as I read through the information that I got and sent, I just went, wait a minute, here's a guy who this is not the guy.
Right. Well, here's the other thing. Let me go on to what you had said before. You asked anybody if they had a criminal record. I was 48 at the time. 48 at the time. I had had one speeding ticket in my life at 16 years old.
Wow.
And from the time of being about 27, 28 to 48, and especially from about 38 to 48, I worked with children in a coaching environment. And there was never nobody, you know how sometimes you'll hear just people come forward after this would happen.
Right.
Nobody
After
came
you're in the
forward. Everybody was shocked. This doesn't make sense. So, I mean, I dealt with 100 kids every summer, plus other times of the year, but definitely 100 kids every summer, and not one ever said there was a problem.
You know what? That is just once again, it's another one of these stories that I got to shake my head back and forth. And why doesn't the DA just let things go when it's not who we're looking for? That brings me, and once again, Rick, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on and sharing your situation with us. And I'm hoping that maybe on appeal or something that they can overturn your case. You can find some relief, and somebody will see the lunacy of that. Vince, creator of Florida Scandal, floridascandal.blogspot.com. Vince, are you with me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, I can. You know what? Your site has been getting a lot of attention. People are talking about it. I think it's well put together. I think you have a lot of facts and figures out there. And you were claiming that basically the enforcement of the statute, which is 847.0135, computer pornography prohibited by computer usage, traveling to meet a minor, and those penalties, doesn't meet the burden of due process clause of the Constitution. You were also saying that men are not knowingly soliciting minors for sex. They're obviously not looking for minors because they're in adult sections and that type of thing. And there are tons of different role plays on these sites. And some of that role play is sex with minors or whatnot, but it's role play between two adults. And all the content is a sexual nature in those adult chat rooms. So can you speak to the statute, that the stings and the way that they are done, how they violate that due process and kind of justify that claim?
Well, they violate due process, like Gary said, because it's circumstantial evidence at best. You know, you're having a fantasy role play chat in an adult environment where the conversation is sex. The conversations are sex, and the environment is loaded with pornography. So the fact that the men that are arrested actually talk about sex is irrelevant or that there was lack of inducement is irrelevant because they were already talking about sex. They're not talking about sex simply because an anonymous person on the other end says, oh, I'm 13, or, oh, hey, come have sex with my 13, 14-year-old sister, they're talking about sex because that's what they're on there to do. So that's circumstantial evidence at best, and there are numerous cases on the blog stating that this kind of activity, just randomly targeting people, is objective entrapment. So the fact, like in Curry v. State, for instance, which is on the blog, the state tried to argue that there was no inducement, therefore there's no entrapment. However, the Curry court found that that's not the issue with objective entrapment, and it's irrelevant that these men weren't induced. However, if you think about the totality of the circumstances, since they're already talking about sex, it really does fall under inducement, because the men are being targeted, which is also unconstitutional. The men are being targeted, which violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, simply because they're looking for conversations about sex or rendezvous involving sex with adults. And then, so essentially, the implantation and inducement occurs when undercover officers access these adult sites, trying to convince these men that, hey, I'm a minor, I'm interested in having sex with you. Let's see what we can get together. And they constantly try to pressure and convince the men that, you know, it's fair game. I'm willing. You know, what's the problem? So
let me get this. Let me get this straight. On these adult sites, you say that there's tons of different types of what people are calling role play or fantasy play.
Correct.
And I guess it's covering all different types of spectrums.
Correct.
Okay. Is it? Do you think it's more moral outrage that these types of sites exist, so that two consenting adults can discuss different types of sexual things that are not mainstream? Do you think that is what's fueling that?
Yes, it's definitely moral outrage. Like in the case of People v. Aguirre, they assume that the average law-abiding male does not get on the internet trying to find casual sex. That's what they assume. But in the opinion, they steer away from that argument because that's not a legal issue at all, and they actually come to the conclusion that law enforcement should not be in the business of testing the will of law-abiding citizens with teens desperate to engage in sexual acts with random middle-aged men. And that, in fact, is the worst kind of virtue testing under numerous cases, not just Florida, but Supreme Court as well, where sex cannot be used to get men to commit felonies. So, or, quote, commit felonies, because in my opinion, under the totality of the circumstances, a crime is not even being committed. There was a case in Florida, and I think the main reason why these stings are so successful is because of the moral outrage, and no decoys are being used. And one case in particular that comes to mind is a perverted justice to catch a predator sting. Thomas Moffett was acquitted simply on the fact that when he showed up at the decoy house, he spoke with the decoy and then tried to leave. He says, I'm not going through with this, I'm leaving, and he left. And that's simply why he was acquitted, is because he changed his mind. Even though the intent originally existed, he showed up there to see what this minor was all about, found out that, you know, he wasn't going to, changed his mind that he wasn't going to go through with it, and then decided to leave, and he got arrested anyway. And abandonment under these statutes is impossible. And also, in my opinion, I think maybe that the statutes are unlawful in the first place because the attempt crime carries the same penalty as the actual crime itself. And the fact that they threw out the impossibility doctrine and the fact that they incorporated the word believe in there makes them unconstitutional, because the statutes don't say anything about the enforcement, how to enforce a law, and police are using the literal interpretation of the statutes to their advantage. The statutes were never meant for law enforcement to pose as promiscuous teens searching for adults to have sex with, and they certainly weren't meant to try to use the topic of sex to get these men to induce these men to seek out sex with a minor.
let me ask Gary at this point. Gary, you heard what Vince has said. First of all, is it illegal for two adults on a chat room or via an email communique in a role play situation to play one as a minor, one as an adult, or one as a minor, one as a teacher? Though it's a moral outrage and people are outraged at that, is it illegal to do that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I want to congratulate Vince on what I think is a very nuanced and really seasoned approach to a lot of the law, because I think I agree with everything he's saying. And here's the deal. There's two different types of entrapment. One is with the question of inducement that we already spoke about, but the other one that Vince was talking about is objective entrapment. And that one, the question before you even get to whether the cop has broken down or induced someone to commit a crime is the question, is what the police are doing too much? And again, it's in the Munoz case, and what they say is in determining whether a defendant was objectively entrapped, courts should look solely to the conduct of law enforcement and determine whether or not such conduct is so egregious as to violate the due process rights of the accused. And that's exactly what Vince is talking about. And I also like the term that Vince used, which is virtue testing, which is exactly right. No one should be tested in this manner and just continually pushed to the breaking point until they are basically bullied into committing a crime. But you're exactly right, Donovan. There's nothing wrong with role-playing. Taking the morality out of it from a purely legal perspective, if there's no kid ever involved and you're just talking and pretending to have sex with a child, it might be distasteful, but it's not illegal. And that's one of the reasons. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well,
that's kind of my point. So, is it not that in these cases that law enforcement is using that particular role play?
Right.
Okay. Leaving enough gray area there for the person not to know whether or not they're truly speaking, because it's all online, it's all over the phone, so you never really know until you arrive what exactly is going on. That there would be reasonable doubt in the mind of the person who is traveling there that the person is not, in fact, or is we heard in some of these other cases, a lot of these cases, that the person they're talking to isn't a minor, but somebody just playing a role play. And in fact, that's what it is.
Right.
Not for the intent of sex, but the intent of entrapment.
Right. So,
or not entrapment, but the intent of prosecution. So it truly is a role play.
Correct. From law enforcement is role playing as well, and the fact that their role playing is being perceived by the defendants as role playing is not being brought across to the jurors. And law enforcement, I've seen at a trial, the law enforcement will duck and weave and try to get out of us answering the question. Isn't it true that people who engage in sexual liaisons online role play? They will not give you a straight answer to that question, because they're counting on, like you talked about, moral outrage and a lack of sophistication with the subculture of people going online for sexual liaisons.
Okay. This is once again, I have to raise an eyebrow if in fact that someone is using someone's if you take someone who believes, that's just like if you went into a bar and you engaged in that type of conversation with a girl sitting at the bar,
right.
She's playing one underage role, you're playing another, and you go and engage in sex after the bar. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illegal about that.
You're 100% right, and I think your analogy is perfect.
Okay, so now that it's being done online? Is this and I guess my question is, if this is what's going on, and instead of being in a bar setting, and no matter what the role play is, okay, I'm the farmer's daughter or whatever it is, okay, not going on in the bar, but now going on in a digital environment, okay. Is this the location that people seeking sex with 14-year-olds, okay, who are truly in the business of doing so, would go. And I don't know if that's I don't know if that's an accurate location to set up your operation.
I agree, Donovan, and let me say this. There's been some research here locally with regards to Orange County Sheriff's agency. There's been some public information requests. Now, this statute went on the books in 2007, and we have pulled information with regards to every prosecution in Orange County, and 100% of the prosecutions came out of these stings since 2007.
Wow.
Outside of police stings, there has never been an arrest in Orange County for someone violating this law. So your question is absolutely on point. Is this even happening outside of these things?
Well, you know what? I want to take this time to pull up some information that I pulled from the Crimes Against Children Research Center. And there is a University of New Hampshire study that is often quoted, and it's called the 1 in 7 use. The 1 in 7 use, the statistic about online sexual solicitation. And their claim was that 1 in 7 use are threatened by online predators. And this is from the writers or the creators of that study. It says the article about online danger frequently cites statistics from the 2005 University of New Hampshire study that 13% of youths were sexually solicited by online predators. And they say the statistic is sometimes referenced as coming from the National Center on Missing and Exploited Children, okay, which funded the study. As the authors of the research upon which these numbers are based, we believe these statistics often have been misunderstood. The following points, okay, they wanted to raise, okay. The first one is these solicitations did not necessarily come from online predators. They were all unwanted online requests to use to talk about sex, okay, answer personal questions or do something sexual, but many could have been from other use. In most cases, use did not actually know the age of the solicitor. When they believed they knew, they said about half were use, okay, other use. The solicitations were not necessarily devious, okay, or intended to lure. Most were brief, but sometimes vulgar or rude comments like, "What's your bra size?" 3, most recipients did not view the solicitations as serious or threatening, okay? And 4, almost all use handled unwanted solicitations easily and effectively. Now, it goes on to say, number 5, and this is what I find important, it says extremely few use, only 2, were actually sexually victimized by someone they met online. This number was too small to be the basis of a reliable estimate of how many youths in the population get sexually victimized from online meetings, okay? But they wanted us to note these estimates, okay? And we prefer that you cite these statistics. 1 in 25 youths, about 4%, got aggressive sexual solicitation. About a quarter or 1/4 of those came from people that the youth knew in person already, and most of them were other youths. About 4%, 1 in 25, were asked to take some type of picture, okay? And in some states, of course, a criminal act. 1 in 25 youths, about 4%, said they were upset or distressed about the solicitation, but otherwise were unharmed. Okay. So, as I'm looking at this information here, the original report is misleading. It's not 1 in 7. It's not 13%. It's more like 4% of what's going on. So I pulled up another study from Child Health, and they pulled a study from the Department of Justice. It says that more than 90% of juvenile sexual abuse victims know their perpetrator in some way. Out of all types of child abuse, 9.2% is some type of sexual abuse. 9.2%. 78% is neglect. So I'm trying to figure out exactly how big or how small this problem is. And it just, I looked at the census statistics. Between 10 and 14 in 2010, there was 1.1 million kids that met that profile in the state of Florida. 565,000 were females. Okay, and 4% of that is 22,000 that fell into the categories that I just went over. So I'm saying, is there really an online predatory problem? It doesn't seem like it's as large as these sting operations are reflecting.
Right. And essentially what Trey was saying is that, about them quoting that, these men come from all walks of life, is ridiculous because, that's what you're going to get when you're going out there offering yourself up freely, willfully, and voluntarily, and encouraging men to break the law. That's what you're going to get, because not everybody is going to respond the same, when they're being pressured by a government agent, especially when sex is concerned.
I tell you what, it's just the problem seems to get larger and larger as we look at some of how these things are conducted. And Vince, I want to thank you for creating the blog Florida Scandal. I suggest everybody go out and take a look at that because you do have some very, very solid information that pertains to this subject that I think folks should know about and the way things are done, because I'm all about, if we are catching people who are preying on our children, but one, we need to do that in a legal fashion and make sure that we're not ensnaring people who have no intention of doing or committing such an act, and that we're spending the majority of our resources targeting or finding those people who are truly a threat to our children, and not somebody playing role play that you're morally outraged about. Yeah, be morally outraged about them. You know what? My mother, if it's not a PG film, or excuse me, a G film, she's morally outraged about it. Okay? My mother will not. She's extremely religious, and she's only going to watch a G-rated film because the rest of them go against her belief systems. And there is out there is somebody, any level, I believe, of sexual content that you watch, be it Sex in the City, a racy R film, be it a Playboy magazine, a Jugs magazine, be it pornography, legal pornography that's available everywhere in the United States, someone's going to be morally outraged about that.
Yeah. Well, I think the main problem here that needs to be brought up is the fact that, the media and law enforcement, the media in particular, are violating, FCC regulations by only covering one side of the story, and they are perpetuating the problem further by telling the public the lies that law enforcement are trying to get them to believe. Now, I've seen in numerous instances where law enforcement have specifically stated that they avoid adult websites to avoid the appearance of entrapment. Well, if they go on record stating that they avoid adult websites to avoid the appearance of entrapment, but that's exactly what they're doing, then essentially they are admitting that they are entrapping men, because that's exactly where they're going to perform the stings, is on an adult website. And I think that's the main thing that needs to be brought up, and that's why people are so morally outraged, is because law enforcement are blatantly lying, telling the public, we investigated these men, we found that they were preying on children, so we arrested them. And that's just a blatant lie.
And I just want to jump in to thank both you, Vince, and Donavon for talking about this sort of fabricated sense of fear. The media and law enforcement have been incredibly successful through a policy of misinformation and selective information at really creating this boogeyman out of the idea of internet sexual predators.
That's exactly right. Boogeyman.
Well, I really have to, I'm a facts and figures type of guy, and I'd like to know, what the statistics are, how many, So I decided to just kind of go out and look, and when I find that out of all total abuse, 9%, 9 point whatever percent is sexual abuse, that's a small percentage. Though, I don't condone that and say write it off, but I'm just saying it's a small percentage. And when you look at the amount of, because this all seems to center around the age 13 and 14, you're talking about in 2010, 22,000 young females that may or may not have been solicited or contacted, and of those contacts, according to this study, only 2 people were that actually led to some type of assault. All of the other was, it was other use or it was disregarded. And I'm saying, hey, can we focus our funds better to target through pedophiles that are out there? There's a story on my blog right now. It's the lead story on the current blog about a sting operation that was done, and it was made known to law enforcement that a guy was trolling, looking for kids online. They set up a sting operation, and it was cut and dry. They got the guy that we're looking for. I think it was very, very well done, and I commended him for doing so, and I'm glad he did, because that's who we were looking for. That brings me to thank you so much, Vince, for being on the show and putting together just an excellent blog. That brings me to Brenda. Brenda, are you with me, first of all?
Yeah. Yes, I am.
Now, your roommate was caught up in the sting operation, and I understand there's some interesting circumstances around this. And so I want to kind of talk to this. And basically, this was another one of these. I'm an adult, but I have a sister type of situation. Okay.
Right. The other he answered was.
Go ahead.
Sisters looking for experience. Woman for male. 28 years old. So just that in itself, and it was on the Craigslist adult section. So just both of those, he automatically felt he was speaking to an adult.
Okay.
When he answered that ad, they started chatting. He started chatting with the adult. Asked her to send a picture. She sent a picture of 2 adults standing near a boat. Clear, 28, 29, 30 years old. Continued talking probably 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then she said, well, my sister's here too, and I want her to be taught sex. He said, I'm all set with that. I'm not going to jail. I've never been with anybody under 18. I'm all set.
Okay, so he plainly stated right there, hey, no. No
yes,
means no, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then they started talking about drinking. Well, he was sitting there having a drink. She asked him what he was drinking. He asked what she was drinking. And they started about meeting, talking to each other about meeting for a drink. She kept insisting for him to meet her at the house. And he kept insisting, I'd rather not. I'd rather meet in a public place. If we're just going to meet and have a couple drinks and talk, I'd rather it be in a public place. At a couple of points in time, the conversation got fairly sexual, but never about the minor.
Okay.
Always directed to her, never spoke to or implied to have spoken to a minor. And finally after, go ahead.
I was going to say, is it safe to say throughout this chat he never referenced any sexual activity with his minor whatsoever?
He never did at all.
Okay.
In fact, a couple of different times when she kept referencing back to it, once his reply was, why? Well, where are her parents? Oh, well,
wow.
they're no... so he would respond to the statements, but never in any sexual manner.
Okay, so there's no way through these chats it could be let's say after reading them in the chat, was there any part of it where you went, oh, well, there it is. He was going to go meet this girl, this younger sister, for sex. Is there...
No.
Is it... Okay.
No, there was none. It was that...
What was agreed upon... And I know eventually he went there, but what was agreed upon on him going there? What was the agreement in there?
To go over there to drink, which he did bring alcohol.
Okay.
And she had made the same reference that's made to all of the other men. Make sure you bring condoms, which he did not bring. There were some in his vehicle, but not on his person. He got there, got to the porch, and paused. Stood there smoking a cigarette, and at that point, he was grabbed by police officers and dragged in the house.
Okay, so he never knocked on the door.
He never even touched the door.
Wow.
One of the other references that was made after she mentioned, well, my little sis wants to know what you want to do with her. And his response was, well, I'm from up north. I talk funny, so you guys will get a kick out of my accent. Wow. Absolutely nothing sexual. I mean, I don't know of anybody who's going to sit there and talk while they're having sex. So none of his responses toward the minor were sexual. To the adult, they were.
To the adult, they were. So his intent was to go over there and hopefully have an encounter with this adult.
Right.
Okay, but he never knocked on the door.
He never touched the door. He got to the porch, the door opened, and he was yanked inside. And arrested.
Gary.
Yeah, this one's bad. I'm actually totally. It sounds like you are too, Donovan. But I'm perplexed. If there was no. Now you say that the officer was bringing up sexual contact with the child. Is that true?
Absolutely, many a times.
Did he ever make any sort of affirmative, like, all right, well, like say anything like that might happen? I understand he never asked for it, but did he ever agree to it? However,
I think the absolute worst that it went to was probably 10 minutes prior to him leaving. He did make a comment, because the officer consistently stated things. He did make a comment, something to the effect of, well, if I meet her, if that's not what she wants, then we'll leave it alone. And that was the only comment. And even that wasn't anything, I mean, those were the words. There was no sexual explicitation. There was no, I'll touch her. There was none of that. And that was after 3 hours of being badgered about my sister.
Now, let me ask you this now, Brenda, very, very quickly. There's another element that everybody's not aware of in this, and it's that your roommate has some medical issue. Would you like to speak to that?
His IQ is 62. His reading level is that of a fourth grader. There were, essentially, they were communicating with a fourth grader, reading and response-wise.
Now, you said, as we talked before, that in you analyzing these chats, there were times that you could see that the person on the other end of the phone should have recognized this fact, or that the person they were talking to might have been at some mental diminishments there. Is that true?
Yes. I don't understand why they didn't cut this conversation off thinking they may actually be talking to a minor because of the grade level. The reading level, the IQ level. It was very clear that it wasn't. I don't even know quite how to put it, but it was clear that it was a lower IQ. Clear that the spelling, the words, the response times, it was questionable. I would have questioned it. Wait a minute, am I talking to an adult?
Gary, let me toss that over to your court. Should from a legal standpoint, should they not have said, "Hey, wait a minute, maybe we're talking to a kid," or if it was that blatant, and if in fact the person was intoxicated, on the other end,
right.
And does that not play something to their defense? In their defense?
Well, that's an excellent question, Donovan. But the truth is, in Florida, at least nowadays, they've sort of gotten rid of the diminished capacity defense. Now,
how do you get rid of it? What do you just throw it in the garbage can? We don't use it anymore. How do you get rid of it?
Yeah, they basically have thrown it out. The courts have basically said like being drunk or high is no longer a defense to a crime. They've sort of taken that away from us. Now with regards to if there's questions about capacity, if the guy, not to be derogatory at all, but the legal term still is mental retardation. If someone's incompetent by reason of mental retardation, that person should not be brought to trial, and also it can be raised sort of like an insanity defense. But also the other reason that I think it's relevant in this case is because, obviously, the cops feel like they can go so far in pushing something without entrapping someone. But that threshold, if someone has mental health issues or mental capacity issues, that they don't have the understanding or the sophistication of a normal adult, then it would probably, I think it's clear that it would probably take less pushing to get that person to do something that they might not normally have done. So I think the entrapment argument is even stronger in that situation.
Well, it concerns me here when once again when no doesn't mean no, that especially when, and it sounds like they're using the two girl scenario, okay, and introduce the minor through that. And in this case, this gentleman, because he's never chatted with the minor, he's only chatting, and no matter what he says back and forth, that's supposed to be legal. They're talking to two, now as they introduce the 14-year-old, okay, and he keeps rebuffing. How much is too much?
Right.
When can we legally say, you know what? This guy said no 27 times, and you guys wouldn't leave him alone. Isn't it a lot like that when you're in a questionable neighborhood and you get out of your car to go pay for your gas, and the homeless guy says, hey, do you have 50 cents? Do you have 50 cents? Do you have 50 cents? As you're walking to go pay for your gas, you go, no, I don't. You walk in, you pay for the gas, you come out, he sees you with the change in your hand. And you go, hey, look, buddy, here's 50 cents. You know what? Take $1. Just go. Okay. Right. When does that, and it sounds like in this guy's case, that all throughout this, from the very beginning, no, I don't want to go to jail. I don't, I have no interest in your sister. I have an interest in you. And they continued to talk. Whatnot. She reintroduces. He says no. And finally, at the end, he said, well, yeah, whatever about the sister.
Right.
Okay, whatever. Whatever about the sister, but I'm coming over to see you, and I'm bringing a bottle of Jack Daniels with me.
Well, Donovan, you're right. That's something I was talking about in the beginning. I do think there needs to be a hard lines about after how many no's should law enforcement leave it alone. To me, it should be like 2. Now, the other thing that I didn't talk about is when they're setting these stings up, a lot of times the agency will have an operational plan in place that sort of gives a set of rules that the officers are supposed to abide by, in theory at least, to prevent the specter of entrapment from being raised. So when you're defending a case, if you have a private lawyer or a public defender, it doesn't matter. They should really check to see if there are operational plans that were used in the sting, and if the way the sting was conducted with regards to the individual, whether they complied with the operational plan. Because you're right, absolutely right. How much is too much? There needs to be some sort of an objective line about that.
Well, yeah, that kind of concerns me. I do think drugs and alcohol are a factor. If we are to believe all the say no to drug advertisement that it's out there, that you're diminished, you can't drive a car if you're intoxicated. We've all had our driver's license. We've read the effects of alcohol on the body. Other drugs, cocaine, methamphetamines, all these other things, they're telling us diminish the capacity of a person, but not when it comes to their sexuality. On the one hand, you're doing these drugs, they're going to ruin your life. You're never going to amount to anything because they turn your brain into mush, right? Except when you're chatting online about sex. Right?
Right.
They either do or they don't.
You're right. You're absolutely right. They play it both ways, and it is unfair. If there's going to be a recognition that drugs and alcohol have some effect on a person's parameters and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, why shouldn't that apply to a defense or at least a mitigator in criminal cases? I agree with you. It's just
I will go a step further because I love analogies. Isn't that why we have ladies' night at the bar?
well, I mean, yes, right.
Isn't that why we have ladies' night? 2-for-1 drinks because we know when a woman's intoxicated, her inhibitions come down, and I have a better shot. I have a much better shot than if I saw her standing in front of Macy's. Okay.
That's exactly correct. Now, but to bring this into the fold with regards to the context of these stings, I think if they were encouraging the defendant to either drink or take drugs during the conversation, I think that would certainly help with an entrapment defense too.
Well,
like I said, she was speaking of alcohol as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a factor.
Yeah.
So it's just in this case, I feel sorry for this guy because it sounds once again as if he had no intention. And can you speak to him not even knocking on the door, or what happened to? If I were to, let's say hypothetically, if I were to walk into a bank and I had the means to rob that bank, I had a note and a weapon, and I walked into the lobby and I said, no, I'm not going to do this, and I leave the bank. Have I committed a crime?
No, and that's an excellent point, because that's called renunciation, and that's an absolute defense to an attempt of a bank robbery, let's say. But the way they drafted this statute, as soon as you get offline, you take one step out the door, even if you change your mind, that's as far as you say, you know what, I'm not going to do this, you're still technically guilty. They've taken the abandonment defense away from us by the way they've drafted this statute. Where basically it exists in every other attempted crime in Florida.
I'm concerned about that because someone, even if it were their intent, and they changed their mind and said, you know what, I'm not going to do this, and that was their sole intent, they should have a chance to change their mind. They should have a chance not to, because nothing has occurred up until that point, which brings me to some of the way that I think these things should be executed is that we know that in our society there are women who are, say, 18, 19, 20, 22 years old who truly look like they are 14, 15 years old. They could pass for 14 and 15, beyond a shadow of a doubt. You go, wow, you're actually 22? No, I couldn't believe that. That we could find these women, we would employ them as decoys, and when the person arrives at the household, it sits down. The moment there is actually an attempt to kiss, fondle, blah 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 blah, that's when the law enforcement comes out. But if they come down and sit down and have a glass of iced tea, and he goes, you know what, I really didn't think you were 14, but you're obviously 14, and this is not what I want to do, they should be allowed to leave. If things are conducted in that manner, one, we provide some new jobs, which we desperately need, and two, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, right?
I agree. They're jumping too soon, I think, is what you're saying. I think you're right.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying it's hard to prove a belief. It's hard to duck the role playing, fantasy, and I try to juxtapose it. Does it meet the drug sting scenario? Drug sting scenario. A guy shows up, an undercover cop shows up. He says, "Do you have this?" Yeah, I got a kilo for you. And the exchange is made, and that's when they swoop in. Open and shut.
Right. And the other thing is, in the context of drugs, there's actually some case law, both federal and state, which state that they're not allowed to use sex to get someone to commit a crime. Like you can't.
Really?
Mm-hmm. But for some reason, the judges aren't biting on that with regards to these crimes. I guess because this crime involves sex as well. But like, for example, if I'm an undercover officer and I'm saying I'll sleep with you if you bring me whatever amount of cocaine, that's improper.
Wow. It is. It just. The subject matter that we don't have enough time, and we've gone a little bit over time, but that's fine. There's not enough time to cover this in its entirety. But I do believe that there should be a proper sting scenario so that we can actually, if in fact we do have an epidemic of pedophiles that are contacting kids through the internet, trying to induce them or trying to solicit them for sex, that we could focus on those.
I don't know.
And back off of these areas where guys are playing fantasy roles. Once again, moral outrage, distasteful. Yes. Is it legal? Yes, it is. It doesn't go against the Constitution. As a matter of fact, the Constitution gives them the right to engage in that type of conversation amongst two consenting adults. And it scares me because being an African American, and I really don't like that term, okay, but it's politically correct. There was a time that same moral outrage was directed at a race of people, my race of people, and there was manipulation of the law. The laws didn't apply to us like they applied to everybody else, though we were protected under the Constitution just like everybody else. And I'm always afraid when something like this happens, because if you can do it to this sector of people, this class of people who enjoys online role play, who else can you do it to? When does it stop? And if we are a nation of laws and we do live under the Constitution, why is it okay or it becomes a pattern to apply them only when we are not morally outraged, when you're accepted in the community? But if you're in a sector of a non-protected class, that the Constitution no longer applies to you. When did that happen?
You said that wonderfully. And what use is the Constitution if it doesn't apply to an unpopular subsection of the population? That's exactly why it's important.
I do think it's important because a lot of people believe that we live in a democratic nation. We're not a democracy. We are a republic. And we don't want to live in a democracy under those guys, because a democracy is true mob rule, which means mob rule can say you have free speech this year and vote it out next year. We live in a republic because there are certain rights that cannot be removed from you no matter what. They can't be voted away. They can't be taken away. And when things go against the Constitution, that's what raises an eyebrow with me. Yes, there are a lot of things that are constitutional but morally outrage people. Once again, I still say it's the best system going if we follow it. And there are times when I am morally outraged, but I take a step back and I say, you know what? It doesn't go against the Constitution. I have to deal with my moral outrage. Just as I believe the white supremacists in our society or the KKK members in our society have a right to believe the way they want to believe. If that is their mantra and that is what they believe and that is their faith, they have a right to believe that. They don't have a right to inflict harm on another person, but they certainly have a right to their beliefs. And I respect them for that, because that's what our nation is about. People who are of a different faith have a right to be of a different faith, just as people who are in a private chat room, an adult chat room, have the right to conduct whatever types of conversation, though how morally outraged the American public can be about it, the Constitution gives them a right to do that. I would say, and I said it on my blog, that, you know what, if you're in an adult chat room and someone says they're 14, discontinue the conversation. Period. Hands down. don't investigate. That's the best defense. I'm sure Gary would agree, though he'd lose some business. That is my best defense there, and I would like to thank everyone who was willing to talk about this particular issue and come on this show and explain what happened to them, that we do have a system of laws, and that if, even in an unpopular subject, that if laws are being broken either on our side or law enforcement side, we need to say something. We need to do that. And I don't think anyone here is promoting online predators and sex with minors. I think everyone here is saying, hey, I got caught in something that I wasn't sure about, or my friend got caught in something they weren't sure about, but no one had the intent to go have sex with some type of minor. I do believe those people exist in our society. I'm just not sure this is the best way to catch them. Once again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the show and coming on. And you can catch this on, we'll post it up on the radio show section, registrationx.net. If you have friends and family who missed it, it'll be reposted there. You can also catch it on TalkShoe as well if you missed the broadcast or want to share it with someone. Other than that, I would simply say that injustice to one is injustice to all. So stand up for your rights and the rights of others. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, Donovan.